Today, on the eve of Darshan, 60 years ago, I arrived from Chennai on a bus that cost me 3 rupees from Chennai to Pandi. 3 rupees. And I had a broken pair of chappals, 1 shirt, and 1 pants. That's all. And Mother took me in. She had written to Jyoti Priya at the East-West Cultural Center. And she said to Jyoti Priya, tell him he may come and stay as long as he likes. I was only 23. So I came, and Dayabai, wonderful soul, put me up in what was called then Parkasharbon, and it's now called Park Guest House. And he would look after me so carefully. And then Jyoti Priya asked Prithvi Singh, look after this young fellow. So I got to know Prithvi Singh's family very well. Abhay Singh, Noran Singh. Abhay Singh was in charge of the atelier and some of the properties like Nandanam. Noran Singh, Mother gave the work of the stamp collection to Noran Singh. And Suprabha took over the stamp collection. She just left us. And then there was Sumitra, who married Bernard and lives in Paris and comes back every year at Darshan times. And the last daughter was Sujata, who was Satprem's companion. So I got to know this family very well. But as my vital was much too restless, I didn't stay very long in the ashram, only a few months, and then I had to go back. So I'm with you tonight to share with you whatever you might like. Many of you may know that Savitri is my life and my sadhana, and Sri Aurobindo and Mother are the only thing that matter in this life. You can forget family, you can forget children, you can forget business, you can forget environment, but never forget Sri Aurobindo and Mother and what they have done for us.
You arrived just on the eve of the darshan?
Yes.
23rd November 1961?
Yes. Yes. And of course it was a very auspicious time because in those days Pondicherry was a small town. There were no motorcycles and no cars. There were only bicycles, and Mother had a car and the governor had a car. That was the only 2 cars in Pandi. And then everyone went around on motorcycles. Pondicherry was a sleepy little town, very sleepy, very quiet. You could walk along the beach road, and you might see 1 or 2 people in a whole night. That's all. It was that quiet. And inside the ashram, there was a force that we can't even speak about. To say that I don't feel that force now would not be totally incorrect. It's a different force now. It is not what we felt in those days. There was such a vibrancy in the atmosphere as you approach the Samadhi. You knelt down often in tears, very often in tears. I haven't told you much about Mother in past meetings, but she was always willing to see me. I would bring a flower to her or a group of flowers, and we would talk about them. Mother would ask me about them. And I think I told you, the group last time, that one day when I went with Sham Sundar, he said to me, "Put your head in Mother's lap." And it was an experience that I can't even explain. She touched my head. On my birthday in 1972, she gave me the name Narad. And I've told this story often, but I share it with many new people tonight. Uh, we knew that Mother was working on transforming the body because every quarter we would get the bulletin, and there would be a section in the bulletin called Notes on the Way. And we would read about what Mother was going through. So I did not want to disturb her, and I knelt down to put my head on her feet, and she gave me a huge bon fete. Mother is 94 at this point. I never felt that she was old. I never felt that she was ailing or in pain. But when I stood down by the samadhi, I could hear her cries of pain very often as she was going through what I understand in my very limited way, taking in the whole world into her being and taking all the pain of the whole world, all the suffering of the world into her being, and working to transform this in her own body so it could go into other bodies, which I know it has. That I can tell you without question. So, after receiving her card in an envelope, I begin to stand up. And Mother says, "Look at your card." Wow. So then I have to kneel and open my card, and there is my old name and my new name. My old name was Richard, my new name, Narad. The boys in the ashram teased me a lot. They couldn't see how a white fellow would be named Narad, but it was Mother's will. Actually, Huta brought that to Mother. She asked Mother once, "Would you name him Narad?" And Mother said, "Ah, but that will take some time." But I believe she knew she was leaving her body. And so it was July 28th, 1972, because the 29th was always reserved for Satprem. It was one of his days. So Mother saw me the day before my birthday and gave me the card. Now, I've had many experiences with Mother, and they are so unique that I don't know how I can even explain many of them. But one of them is very easy to explain. Mother is standing with me on the edge of the worlds, plural, And she says, and she's showing me all the galaxies, all the nebulae. And she says, I have shown you the diversity in order that you may realize the unity. See, everything is already in harmony. We just have to work it out. It's already there. The supermental is already in us. We know that. Because as it descends into this lower hemisphere, it enters us perhaps a little quietly, perhaps unknown to us, certainly behind a veil, and does its work. An all-knowing guest and guide, he says, in Savitri. Now, how many of you read Savitri? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Please begin to read Savitri. It does not matter if you don't understand it. That's the first problem that most people encounter. Oh, he writes in using such difficult, challenging words like Circean. I had that the other night with a student. Circean, he uses Greek, French, Latin. For example, the touch of tears in mortal things, he took from Virgil. And in his future poetry, he quotes it right there. And he said that was exactly the term that was needed at that point. This touch of tears in mortal things. And of course, it's the story of Savitri. But more than that, it's the story of divine love that has the power to conquer death and bring the life divine onto the earth. Nothing has ever been written like this before. Nothing. There are passages that take you straight up. There are passages that take you down. Because Sri Aurobindo had to go down into the lowest depths to bring there the light. And it was not an easy journey. He said that he had been experimenting more than any scientist in his yoga. And those of you who, I guess, who have read, what is it, Anmo? His work on his experiences, record of yoga, then you know how much he went through, how much he experimented. And then he says that he had suffered everything that we have suffered, and Mother 10 times more. Well, this is the return to earth. What a perfect canto. Canto 12. Canto 12 is the return to earth, and it's the epilogue. So, Shraddhavan speaks to Savitri, and he says, "Whence hast thou brought me captive back, love chained to thee and sunlight's walls? O golden beam and casket of all sweetness, Savitri, Godhead and woman, moonlight of my soul." Now, what a passage that is. He doesn't really know where he has been. Whence hast thou brought me captive back? He says he's a captive of Savitri. He's chained by love. And he comes back to her and sunlight's walls. And then he calls her, O golden beam and casket of all sweetness, Savitri. And he continues, Godhead and woman, moonlight of my soul. For surely I have traveled in strange worlds, by thee companion, a pursuing spirit. Together we have disdained the gates of night. Well, we see in the beginning when Satyavan has left his body and death has come to claim him, death is in the front. Afterwards it changes and Savitri is in the front. It's very, very interesting. She is leading death. I have turned away from the celestial's joy, and heaven's insufficient without thee. He sees that this celestial joy, which is so great, is up there someplace, but it is not here on earth. He wants it, and of course he is Sri Aurobindo speaking here. He wants it to be on earth. And what does he say? He says, where now has passed that formidable shape? That formidable shape is death, which rose against us. And then he even calls death the spirit of the void, claiming the world for death and nothingness, denying God and soul. But in the end, we see that death is not actually that. Death becomes a helper. Death, although he is eaten by light in one passage, Savitri speaks to him very kindly at the end. She speaks to him so gently. She knows that he has a purpose in this life, and that purpose is to accelerate our evolutionary movement upward. Because when we can no longer progress at the speed that we must progress, death comes. Now, that's something very important for all of us to be aware, that we have to progress as much as possible. We have so many problems. We face illnesses. We face the illnesses of loved ones. We often face anger in others, or discontent, anger in ourselves, violence in ourselves, which is truly not in ourselves, but it uses us because we make it available. And when we are angry and strike out at someone else, why do we do that? Because a force is using us, not because we will it. We are not of that nature. He continues, or was all a dream, or a vision seen in spiritual sleep, a symbol of the oppositions of time, or a mind-lit beacon of significance in some stress of darkness, lighting on the way, or guiding a swimmer through the straits of death, or finding with the succor of its way, of its ray, in a gully mid the crowded streets of chance, the soul that into the world adventure came. This is so important, this line. the soul that into the world adventure came. Sri Aurobindo, in the first canto of the first book, calls it the adventure of consciousness and joy. And that was the title that Satsang took for his book, The Adventure of Consciousness. And so many of us in the Western world, I believe, grew up on that book. It touched us so deeply. There are other books, of course, that are there, the prayers and meditations. If one truly listens to the prayers and meditations, oh, there is nothing like them. Mother Prithvi Singh said, was not speaking of herself when she wrote the prayers and meditations. She was speaking of us. That's the way we should read the prayers and meditations. So I'll go through a few more things. When Savitri speaks to him, but she replied, our parting was the dream. We are together. We live, O Satyavan. Such simple words. We are together. We live, O Satyavan. After all that she has been through, all the worlds that she had to go through, all the trials and tribulations to find her own soul, she says so simply, we are together. We live, O Satyavan. Look round thee, and behold, glad and unchanged, our home, this forest with its thousand cries, and the whisper of the wind among the leaves, and through rifts in emerald seen the evening sky, God's canopy of blue sheltering our lives, and the birds crying for heart's happiness, winged poets of our solitary reign, our friends on earth, where we are king and queen. Only our souls have left death's night behind, changed by a mighty dream's reality. And we have so many things of dream in Savitri, which but for the dream would not be wholly true. That great line, that everything is a dream here, and except for the dream, it wouldn't be wholly true. And then she says to him, illumined by the light of symbol worlds and the stupendous sum itself of things, and stood at Godhead's gates, limitless, free. She doesn't say the divine gates. She doesn't say the celestial gates. She doesn't say the supernal gates, the supramental gates. She says Godhead's gates. It's quite different here. Now, then, filled with the glory of their happiness, they rose, and with safe, clinging fingers locked, hung on each other in a silent look. But he, with a new wonder in his heart, and a new flame of worship in his eyes. Now, this is a very interesting passage because he speaks to Savitri now, and he asks her, what high change is in thee, O Savitri? Bright ever thou wast, a goddess still and pure, yet dearer to me by thy sweet human parts, earth gave thee, making thee yet more divine. My adoration mastered, my desire bent down to make it subject, my daring clasped, claiming my body and soul, my life's estate, rapture's possession, love's sweet property, a statue of silence in my templed spirit, a yearning Godhead, and a golden bride. And then these lines, which I repeat so often. But now thou seemst almost too high and great for mortal worship. Time lies below thy feet, and the whole world seems only a part of thee. Thy presence, the hushed heaven I inhabit, and thou look'st on me in the gaze of the stars, yet art the earthly keeper of my soul, my life a whisper of thy dreaming thoughts, my morns a gleaming of thy spirit's wings, and day and night are of thy beauty part. There are almost 24,000 lines Sri Aurobindo wrote until his very last days. When he asked Narad, "Is it finished?" Narad said, "No, sir." He says, "The book of death and the epilogue still remain to be completed." And Sri Aurobindo said, what did he say, Anmo?
We'll see about that later.
We'll see about that later. That always tells me that he's coming back to us, that he will be with us, and a new poetry will emerge. A poetry that has actually the ability to change our bodies, to change our lives. It will have that power in it, a power that we've not seen. We glimpse it in some of Sri Aurobindo's experiments in meter, which are extremely complex and very new. No one has done this before. He's given us many, many examples. He called himself first a poet. Didn't even call himself a yogi first, or an avatar, but first a poet. Now, if you have some questions, because you're very new to us here, many of you have come for the darshan, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Original Savitri Vachurjay. Original Savitri Vachurjay ke translated?
नहीं, original.
Huh?
Should we read the original Savitri or the translated version? Because they are Gujarati, so તમે ગુજરાતીમાં વાંચો?
હા, હું ગુજરાતીમાં વાત કરું, મને ઇંગ્લિશ નથી આવડતું.
કાંઈ વાંધો નહીં. So
it's a good question, a very good question. I would say begin with the Gujarati, because that may not be perfect, but it will be an entrance for you into Savitri. It will give you the basic concept of the poem, but as soon as possible, go to the original. As soon as possible.
how to open to the mother. Okay. How to open to the mother.
Keep her photo always where you can see it. Secondly, take her name as often as you can.
He's saying that wouldn't that lead to attachment to the form? But he wants to open, he's talking about opening to the Divine Mother in her divine form.
But that is not attachment to the form.
Exactly.
She's no longer with us
And also,
in the physical body.
I would say attachment to the mother is good.
And it's a perfect
Perfect
attachment.
attachment. They're asking who suggested you to come to Pondicherry?
When you came at the age of 23.
23, who gave, from where did that inspiration
It's a very interesting question, yeah, because I was studying Raja Yoga in my late teens with a Pandit Bekpati Sinha, and he was a brilliant man, brilliant man. I mean, he was a real guru. And he didn't have many disciples at all. We were a group of about 10 or 12 people who would meet every week in his apartment in New York City. He was married to a Swedish girl, had two lovely little girls. And one night I heard this Jewish man say something about Sri Aurobindo. It was the first time I heard his name. And he said, "Oh, yes, I know that fellow. He's the one who writes 10 words when he could have written one." That's all I heard. So anyway, he promised me a trip to Shantiniketan to study Indian music. And all I would have to do is pay my passage there and back. Everything else would be taken care of. Boarding, food, education, everything. Next day I met Jyoti Priya. You can explain that. Her name was given by Sri Aurobindo.
Yes.
How did you happen to meet her?
I wound up and I saw this place called East West Cultural Center. And I went in.
And then
That
what?
time it is,
22.
And she said, you are destined to see Mother. You must go and see Mother.
Right.
And she took a sample of my handwriting and my photo. So you can.
India Mother.
And she wrote to Mother. And immediately Mother sent that telegram back.
Right.
So, any other question?
He has a question that Mother says become conscious. What does that mean?
We are all somewhat conscious. We know when we've spoken badly to someone. We know when we haven't done something that we had to do. What we are not conscious of is our soul.
So his main question is how to become conscious of the soul. That he
No, it's a very fair
Soul
question.
care.
It's a very
It's a
important
very-
question.
Sarah's question.
How to become conscious of the soul? The first thing you have to see is, what have I learned from my environment, my family, my work or profession? And take all of that away and then say, well, what am I now? What am I there? Why are these desires coming? Why are these mental things flowing through me minute by minute?
His question is, if when you are moving in that direction, you start crying, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good thing.
Sarah's question.
It is an example of the psychic tears that are longing to come out of you. And we have to close out now. I'll take one question from Anmol. But I want to say to all of you, you are all here because you have already heard the call. You may not know it. You may not know it this way, but you know it here.
He's saying if you cry, then the negativity enters you.
No, it doesn't have to enter you. There are many kinds of tears. There's the tears of sorrow. There's tears of longing. There's tears of hope. There's tears on betrayal. There's so many kinds of tears. The tears that you experience are the psychic tears. Don't question them.